You are listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with Steve Worsley, the toxic mold expert and your number one source for mold consulting and mitigation in the USA. Let's dive into a brand new episode. Before we get started on this episode, here's a not so short disclaimer. While all attempts have been made to verify the content provided in this podcast, neither the podcaster or the producers assume any responsibility for errors, omissions, or alternative interpretations of the issues discussed here. All information stated in this podcast is the opinion of Steve Worsley. Steve Worsley is a mold specialist with over 25 years of experience in the construction and mold industry. The Toxic Mold Podcast is for information sharing purposes only. The views expressed are those of the podcaster and his alone. These views should not be taken as expert instruction or commands. While there may be references to medical conditions and symptoms, all podcast episodes are the opinion of Steve Worsley, and any medical questions or concerns shall be addressed with the appropriate licensed medical professional or professionals. As the podcaster refers to different mold types, please be aware that Steve Worsley is not a microbiologist, and questions concerning mold specifics should be answered by the appropriate professional. Steve isn't, nor does he offer any legal advice. For any legal advice, you must speak with a lawyer. The listener is 100% responsible for his or her own actions. You can check out Steve's books on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and search for author Steve Worsley. You can also take Steve's courses on Udemy or Skillshare, and you can find out more about those at cnccontractorservices.com. Now, let's get to the episode.
Hello, you're listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with myself, Steve Worsley, and we have my wife, Cassandra. Your birthday month, well, your birthday's over, but your birthday month's still going.
It is going strong.
We have, just talking about this, I am going to do another interview with Dr. Diane. So for our listeners, that should be coming up here in a few weeks.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Just to give everybody somewhat of a heads up. But today's topic is an interesting one. And we've talked about this before, but I get this question all the time. Does mold grow in the winter months? And it's, when we've talked about CNC contractor services, we typically slow down in the winter months, just like a construction company does, which is kind of odd.
That is odd.
I mean, we've done a few jobs here and there, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, it does slow down. Haven't you had lots of people ask you or tell you that mold couldn't possibly be an issue in a state like Wyoming because it is so cold? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I thought so.
All the time.
I thought so.
And, a lot of people think, too, because mold's naturally present, there's no issues in dry states like Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, Idaho. As you can see, Colorado, we do work all over.
Exactly.
Out here. So it can happen anywhere. But going back to that question, can mold actually grow in the winter if it's above freezing? Now, if it's freezing, then typically no.
Okay, because the freezing temperatures encapsulate.
It's in a non-viable state.
It's dormant, is what.
Yes.
Okay, dormant. Yes.
This is where mold is so complex. I'm not gonna say it can't grow if it's freezing, and if an entire home is frozen. Remember, we did that job up in Shoshone, and it was because a water pipe burst.
Yep.
And when we initially went there, it was January, so it was frozen. The mold wasn't that bad. We didn't do the remediation because this was a government project and the bidding process takes months. When we went in April to do the remediation, it had gotten quite a bit worse.
Absolutely, because it was no longer freezing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, for our listeners who live in a home and they're like, well, only one part of my home, like say the garage isn't heated, can mold grow in there? It just depends. I know that's not a direct answer, but on the other hand, I want our listeners to understand if a building is below freezing, you should not have a mold issue at that current time. Now, if there was a mold concern in the fall, just because it turned into winter doesn't mean there's not mold there. But on the other hand, when it thaws out, it's going to get worse.
Well, and you're also mentioning buildings that are below freezing, but if somebody is heating their home and the home's average room temperature is 70 degrees, that's not below freezing.
Exactly.
So you could easily, in the wintertime when most people are indoors, have a mold problem because if your home is heated, it is not freezing.
Exactly. But, like when we go up into the attic, if it's insulated properly, your attic is very, very cold because it's holding all the heat in. Mm-hmm. So the reason we're talking about this, and I kind of want to backtrack just a little bit, I just want our listeners to understand the time of year that it is doesn't really dictate how much mold is capable of growing in your home.
Correct, because there are many other conditions in the home that could facilitate the growth of mold.
Yep. So it's just a question I get all the time. Now, on the other hand, do a lot of mold jobs that we're doing in the spring and summer, are they from freezing temperatures? It's because a water pipe froze and caused a moisture intrusion event, and it was bad.
Should people be more concerned about mold in the winter when they're all cooped up in the house in the summer? I mean, I'm thinking about people are out hiking and biking in the summer, and so they're not sitting in the home as much as they're in the winter. Is it of deeper concern?
So it's always a concern. And do people notice it more? I know that wasn't your question, but that's typically what it boils down to.
Okay.
People are in their homes more. We've done previous episodes about cabin fever and all that stuff. We just said that we slow down like general contractors. What I mean by that is for mold remediation. My consultations, those usually pick up in the winter because people are in their homes. Mm-hmm. Like you said, summertime, they're out riding ATVs, mountain bikes, doing whatever, hiking. Wintertime, I'm not saying people don't get out, but unless you're snowmobiler or snow skier, you don't get out as much. So we do see problems more in the winter months because of that. Not because of the actual temperature.
Absolutely. And so it's really, and I think what's challenging is you mentioned that mold remediation slows down in the winter months for you. And I think some of it has to do with holidays. Like nobody wants their house to be out of their house over any of the Christmas holidays, New Year's, Thanksgiving. Like from November to January, most people are like, this is the last thing I need is to be out of my house. But if people aren't really thinking about handling mold in the summer because they're out of the house a lot more, and they don't feel the symptoms a lot more, it does lead to needing then to handle something when they notice all of the exposure.
Yeah, so, to piggyback off of that, because, people are in their homes more in the winter months, they're going to notice it, and it's going to be a higher priority. And like you said, this time of year, we're past the holidays, so that's typically not an issue. But there are people, and I have lots of clients that they are mold sensitive. They have CIRS, which is CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. They could have autoimmune disorders, Hashimoto's, lupus, just a ton of different issues. Lyme, which we'll talk with Dr. Diane about a lot. Those conditions, doesn't matter what time of year it is. If they're being exposed to mold, they have to remove themselves.
Absolutely. And so when do you, and some people might look at, okay, well, it's freezing temperatures outside. Mold is not such an issue in the winter, but when does it, there is an effect when things thaw, right? It becomes an issue starting when? Well,
once again, I want to be clear, just because it's cold and freezing outside doesn't mean you're not going to have concerns inside.
Okay.
Now, if you're living in the home, there are going to be concerns. To kind of go off of what you're asking, in the spring is when we see a lot of mold issues. And once again, is that because of the thaw effect? Is it because it's warming up and people are noticing things? That's just when we typically see whatever issues that were maybe dormant during the winter months. Now it becomes viable, it starts reproducing, it gets worse. But, just to be clear for our listeners, just because it's cold and freezing outside doesn't mean you can't have a mold concern inside your home.
Absolutely. So when we think about it, winter isn't necessarily protecting people from mold.
No, exactly.
Okay.
That's my point. Unless your home is below freezing temperatures, which nobody could live in a home like that, doesn't mean mold's not a concern.
And, I mean, people are spending so much time in their home in the winter. What can they do knowing that they might have a mold concern to prevent mold when they know in the winters they're at home so much of the time?
Well, it just depends. If there's not a actual, visible, and it doesn't have to be visible, but if there's not an active colony, meaning there's not a major mold concern per se, air purifiers would be great. Okay. We just got you one for Christmas.
Yep.
And you can turn it on and off from your phone. Like, you think it's pretty handy. I don't ever mess with it.
It's even got a night mode.
Yeah. I mean, it's got all sorts of things.
You can turn it on and off right from your phone, right from the app. It's perfect.
And
it's quiet.
Yeah. And I guess my point is like, if you don't have a mold infestation down in your basement, an air purifier will help improve the air quality. If there's a mold infestation that's in your basement or hidden behind a wall, an air purifier is not going to do you any good. So going back to your question, what can people do? It's the same thing we talk about all the time. Humidity gauges.
Okay.
Like our listeners, if you've been listening for even a few episodes, but if you've been listening for a few years, the easiest, cheapest way to prevent mold concerns in your home, buy humidity gauges.
Absolutely. They also come with apps depending on what you buy.
Exactly. We have 3 Govies.
Yep.
And we have one in our master bath. We have one in the laundry room and one in the mechanical room in the basement.
Exactly.
And you can set alarms where it notifies you. I'm assuming they've never gone off.
No, never gone off.
So our listeners are going to laugh at this, but I don't pay that much attention to that. Now, we have humidity gauges literally in every room in the house. I pay attention to the humidity. Mm-hmm. It's just never high enough for us to think it's of concern. And if it was, I know a good mold guy. So... But it brings up something that's interesting that we see quite often. So it's freezing outside. You have it warm inside. What's the most common thing we're going to see that causes mold? Condensation.
Like in the windows.
Yep.
Okay.
The windows they'll create an ice layer, especially if they're cheaper windows. Typically a decent dual pane window is not going to have condensation. But for our listeners, if you have curtains up all the time, you might want to open them up and get some airflow in there.
Okay.
Because over time, that condensation obviously is going to turn the sheetrock or insulation. It's going to do water damage. That's going to cause mold, and it can cause problems. We've seen it. I wouldn't say a lot, but it's not uncommon for us to see issues because people have curtains up in front of their, they have their blinds down, they're closed, and they put curtains in front of it. You have no airflow in there, and that condensation causes problems.
What about water alarms?
So a water alarm is very handy for not like a condensation issue, but let's just say like our home, if we're going and doing a mold job, we typically like to shut the water off. But let's just say even if you're at home, in your mechanical room where there's a water heater, or let's say if you have a crawl space that you don't go inspect often, you can put a water alarm in there. It's literally a sensor that they're all different. They either battery operated or you can plug it into a wall outlet. Once moisture hits that sensor, it's an audible alarm.
Okay.
Like a smoke alarm.
Oh, okay. Huh.
And you can get different types. You can get types that are Bluetooth to your phone that if you're out of town, and this is a whole water monitoring system, you can buy things and have a plumber install things on your main water valve that you can literally see how much water's running through your meter, I guess is the best way to say it, or through the plumbing lines. And if nobody's home and you're seeing all this water running through it, there's obviously a problem, and you can actually shut your water off remotely.
Which is the game changer for somebody who's on vacation somewhere else and won't be home for 2 weeks and has nobody who's going to check on it. Okay.
Yep.
So can you put water alarms? I think I've seen this on like washer dryer. No?
You can put them in so like for a washing machine, you should have a drip pan or a pan below it.
Okay.
You would put it in that pan. For a water heater, you have a drip pan. You would put it right in there.
Okay. And so do you recommend that people get water alarms to prevent mold in the winter?
Yeah. I mean, that's always a suggestion that I always suggest. But on the other hand, like routine inspections would replace that.
Okay.
But on the other hand, like let's say you have a home up in the mountains and and you keep the heat on and, maybe you don't shut the water off. I don't know why you do that, but let's just say, you have a situation like that. You could get a water alarm that's tied to or Bluetooth to your internet, and that way you can monitor it. So I guess to answer your question, it really depends on your situation, and it's never a bad thing to buy water alarms.
But at minimum, you would say the humidity gauges are critical.
Yeah. And if, going back to water alarms, so let's just say a listener's like, okay, Steve, I'm going to buy 3 of them. Where do I put them? If you have a full basement and a mechanical room down there, I'd put one in there. I'd put one in your laundry room and then probably like in your kids' bathroom. If you have a crawl space, you could put it in your crawl space right on the floor. Like, depending on your situation would dictate where you put them. Like if you're in a home that has a fire suppression system, you would put it, close to those water lines.
Very cool. So what's your call to action for people?
We just said it. Do routine inspections around your home.
When you say routine, how often?
Well, I would personally do them once a month.
Okay. And that's different from the fall and spring checklist.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when I say routine inspections, I'm not saying hire a professional.
Yeah.
Take 10 minutes, once a month on Sunday mornings to go check your mechanical room or go look in your crawl space. Like, you don't have to inspect your entire home, just the problematic areas.
That's good to know.
And we have, you talked about the spring and fall checklist. We have an email list. You can go right to our website. I'll put a link to it in the description. But there's the mold fact sheet. What's the other one?
And the mold investigation checklist.
That's right.
And you've also got the how to hire the right mold professional.
Exactly. Yep. So it's simple. All you got to do is you more or less just sign up on our email list. You'll get that PDF. We send emails out. I have not been very routine, I guess is the best way to say it. But you'll get emails from me personally, and it won't be very often is my point. But you're just signing up for an email list. And if promotions, then, you'll be the first to know.
Well, and it's a good way to get educated about mold over time.
Exactly. Yep. Well, we appreciate all of you. I hope you're staying warm out there. And like I said, we have Dr. Diane's interview. It'll be probably in a few weeks from today. So for our listeners, keep listening, and we appreciate all of you. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you go to our website at cnccontractorservices.com and sign up for the mold investigation checklist. Again, go to cnccontractorservices.com and get your free mold investigation checklist today. You can also on cnccontractorservices.com find out more about Steve's courses and books and consultations. Once again, go to cnccontractorservices.com.